When my husband walked into our prenuptial agreement review with his confident female lawyer by his side, he expected to secure his financial future through carefully crafted legal maneuvers. What he did not expect was for me to calmly inform them both that I actually owned her entire law practice. The silence that followed would change everything about our marriage, our divorce, and the trajectory of 3 professional careers forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conference room at Sterling, Matthews & Associates felt deliberately intimidating, with its mahogany paneling, floor-to-ceiling legal volumes, and imposing portrait of the firm's founding partner. The morning sunlight streaming through tall windows created dramatic shadows across the polished table, where our prenuptial agreement lay waiting for what my husband David assumed would be a routine modification review. He had scheduled this meeting 6 months before our planned wedding date, presenting it as a practical necessity to protect both our interests as we entered marriage. I had arrived 15 minutes early, as was my custom for important meetings, and spent the time reviewing the documents that would supposedly govern our financial arrangements throughout our marriage. David had insisted on hiring his own legal representation, explaining that independent counsel would ensure fairness and prevent any appearance of coercion in our agreement terms. His choice of attorney had been Victoria Sterling, a renowned family law specialist whose reputation for protecting high-net-worth clients was well established throughout the metropolitan legal community. David entered the conference room with the confident stride of someone who believed he held all the strategic advantages. At 38 years old, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that had made him successful in commercial real estate development, where his ability to negotiate complex deals had generated substantial personal wealth over the previous decade. His tailored suit and expensive watch conveyed the message that he was accustomed to getting his way in professional settings, and his smile suggested he viewed this meeting as merely another business transaction to be managed efficiently. Victoria Sterling followed closely behind him, carrying a leather briefcase that matched her impeccably professional appearance. She was approximately my age, with the sharp intelligence visible in her eyes that had earned her partnership in one of the city's most prestigious family law firms before age 35. Her reputation for aggressive client advocacy was legendary among divorce attorneys, and several high-profile cases had established her as someone who could secure favorable outcomes, even in complex financial disputes involving substantial assets and complicated business interests. "Sarah, I appreciate your flexibility in scheduling this review," David said as he settled into his chair across from me. "Victoria has identified several areas where we can strengthen the agreement to better protect both our interests moving forward." Victoria opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency and withdrew several folders containing what appeared to be extensively revised prenuptial terms. Her demeanor was professionally cordial, but clearly focused on advancing her client's objectives rather than fostering collaborative discussion about our mutual interests. "Ms. Mitchell," Victoria addressed me with formal courtesy, "I have prepared comprehensive revisions that address potential areas of ambiguity in your current agreement while ensuring both parties understand their rights and obligations throughout the marriage and in the event of dissolution." The revised terms she presented represented a dramatic departure from our original agreement, which had been relatively straightforward in its division of assets and spousal support provisions. The new language included complex trust structures, detailed business valuation methodologies, and restriction clauses that would significantly limit my financial rights, while expanding David's control over marital assets and future earnings. As Victoria explained each revision with legal precision, I realized that David had been planning this restructuring for months, while presenting himself as committed to our partnership and shared future. The proposed changes would essentially render me financially dependent on his goodwill, while protecting his existing wealth and future business ventures from any claims I might have as his spouse. These modifications reflect best practices in contemporary prenuptial agreements, Victoria continued, her tone suggesting that resistance to such terms would be unreasonable. They provide clear protection for premarital assets, while establishing frameworks for addressing acquisition of property and income during the marriage. David nodded approvingly as Victoria presented each provision, occasionally adding comments that revealed his detailed involvement in crafting language that would serve his interests. His satisfaction with the proposed terms was evident in his relaxed posture and frequent smiles directed at Victoria, whose professional competence had clearly impressed him during their preparation process. "I think you will find these revisions address most of the concerns that might arise during our marriage," David said, his tone implying that my agreement was expected rather than requested. Victoria has been extremely thorough in anticipating potential issues and developing protective language. I listened carefully to their presentation while maintaining the composed demeanor that had served me well throughout my career in financial consulting. My professional background had taught me to analyze complex agreements systematically, while avoiding emotional responses that might cloud my judgment about terms and implications. However, as Victoria continued explaining provisions that would severely limit my financial security, while expanding David's control over our economic relationship, I began to understand that this meeting represented something far more significant than prenuptial modification. This was David's attempt to restructure our entire relationship dynamic through legal mechanisms that would render me financially subordinate regardless of my professional contributions or personal sacrifices during our marriage. The realization was both infuriating and clarifying. David had spent months presenting himself as a committed partner who valued our relationship, while secretly working with Victoria to develop legal structures that would protect his interests at my expense. His willingness to deceive me about his intentions while expecting me to accept terms that would disadvantage me revealed a fundamental lack of respect for both my intelligence and my autonomy. More disturbing was Victoria's apparent comfort with representing David in developing an agreement that would leave his fiancé financially vulnerable. Her professional reputation was built on aggressive client advocacy, but her willingness to participate in what essentially amounted to financial manipulation suggested either ethical blindness or deliberate disregard for the power dynamics she was helping to create. As Victoria concluded her presentation of the revised terms, David leaned forward with an expression of satisfied anticipation. "I think this framework provides excellent protection for both of us, while giving us clear guidelines for managing our finances throughout the marriage. Do you have any questions about the provisions Victoria has outlined?" The question was clearly rhetorical, delivered with the confident assumption that I would accept the terms they had developed without meaningful resistance. David's tone suggested that he viewed my consent as a formality rather than a genuine decision point that might result in negotiation or rejection of his proposed modifications. Victoria began organizing her papers with the efficient movements of someone preparing to conclude a successful presentation. Her demeanor suggested that she expected prompt agreement to terms that would secure her client's objectives while generating substantial legal fees for her participation in the process. I allowed the silence to extend for several seconds while reviewing the documents spread across the conference table. The proposed prenuptial revisions represented months of careful planning designed to achieve David's financial objectives while minimizing his risk and responsibility. The legal language was sophisticated and comprehensive, reflecting Victoria's expertise in developing protective frameworks that would withstand potential challenges. However, their carefully constructed strategy contained a fundamental flaw that neither David nor Victoria had anticipated. While they had focused on developing terms that would protect David's interests and limit my financial rights, they had failed to consider the possibility that I might possess resources and knowledge that could fundamentally alter the power dynamics they were attempting to establish. Before I respond to these proposed modifications, I said calmly, "I think there is something both of you should understand about the foundation underlying this entire discussion." David's expression shifted slightly as he registered the unexpected tone in my response. Victoria looked up from her papers with the sharp attention of someone detecting potential resistance to terms she had expected would be accepted without significant objection. "Victoria," I continued, maintaining direct eye contact with David's confident attorney, "I am curious about your thoughts on the ethical implications of representing someone in developing an agreement designed to financially disadvantage their partner, particularly when that representation involves your firm's conflict of interest policies." Victoria's professional composure remained intact, but her slight pause before responding suggested that my question had introduced complexity she had not anticipated. "I am not sure I understand your concern, Ms. Mitchell. My representation of Mr. Harrison is entirely appropriate and follows all relevant ethical guidelines for prenuptial agreement development." "I am sure you believe that," I replied, reaching into my own briefcase to withdraw a folder I had brought to the meeting. However, I think your assessment might change when you understand the actual relationships involved in this situation. David's confident expression began to falter as he sensed that the meeting was not proceeding according to his expectations. Victoria maintained her professional demeanor, but her increased attention suggested that she recognized potential complications emerging from what should have been a straightforward agreement modification. I opened my folder and withdrew several documents that I placed carefully on the conference table between us. The papers included corporate filings, partnership agreements, and financial statements that told a story neither David nor Victoria had expected to encounter during what they assumed would be a routine legal proceeding. Victoria, you have presented yourself as an independent attorney representing David's interests in developing a prenuptial agreement that would protect his assets while limiting my financial rights during and after our marriage, I said, maintaining the calm tone that had characterized my participation throughout the meeting. However, your independence in this representation becomes questionable when we consider the actual ownership structure of Sterling, Matthews and Associates. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria's professional mask slipped slightly as she registered the implications of my statement. David looked confused, clearly unable to follow the direction of my comments, but sensing that the power dynamics of the meeting were shifting in ways he had not anticipated. I pushed the first document across the table toward Victoria. This is the current partnership agreement for Sterling, Matthews and Associates, filed with the State Corporation Commission 3 months ago. As you can see, the firm's ownership structure has changed significantly from the original founding partnership that established your reputation in the legal community. Victoria reached for the document with movements that had lost their earlier confidence. Her eyes moved rapidly across the legal language that detailed the firm's current ownership arrangements, and I watched as her professional composure began to crack with her growing understanding of the situation. According to these filings, I continued, Sterling, Matthews and Associates is now wholly owned by SMK Holdings LLC, a Delaware limited liability company that was formed specifically to acquire controlling interest in your law practice. The acquisition was completed through a combination of cash payment and assumption of the firm's outstanding debts, including the significant overhead costs associated with maintaining your prestigious office location and extensive support staff. David was staring at the document with obvious confusion, still unable to understand the relevance of Victoria's firm ownership to their prenuptial modification discussion. However, Victoria's increasingly pale complexion suggested that she was beginning to comprehend the implications of the information I was sharing. I withdrew a second document from my folder and placed it beside the first. This is the operating agreement for SMK Holdings, which details the management structure and ownership distribution of the company that now controls your law practice. As you can see, the LLC is managed by a single member who holds 100% of the ownership interest and makes all strategic decisions regarding the company's operations and investments. Victoria reached for the second document with hands that were no longer steady. Her legal training enabled her to process the corporate structure quickly, and I could see her understanding the connection between the LLC ownership and her current situation representing David against my interests. The single member and manager of SMK Holdings, I said, allowing a slight smile to cross my face for the first time during the meeting, is Sarah Catherine Mitchell, which means that I own your law practice, Victoria. I own your office, your equipment, your client files, and most importantly, I control your partnership distribution and employment status at the firm you thought you were running independently. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at the documents with the expression of someone watching her professional world collapse in real time. David's mouth had fallen open as he processed the revelation that his fiancée owned the law practice of the attorney he had hired to protect his interests against her. The implications were staggering and immediate. Victoria's representation of David against my interests constituted a massive conflict of interest that violated fundamental ethical principles governing attorney conduct. Her aggressive advocacy for terms that would financially disadvantage me while she was ultimately accountable to me as the owner of her practice created liability that could result in professional sanctions, malpractice claims, and potential disbarment proceedings. More personally, David's confidence in his strategic advantage had evaporated, with the understanding that the attorney he trusted to protect his interests was actually employed by the woman he had been attempting to manipulate through legal mechanisms. His carefully planned prenuptial modification had become a public demonstration of his willingness to deceive his partner while exposing his fundamental misunderstanding of the power dynamics in our relationship. "How long have you owned the firm?" Victoria asked, her professional training enabling her to focus on the practical implications despite her obvious shock at the revelation. "I acquired controlling interest 14 months ago," I replied, maintaining my calm demeanor while enjoying their stunned reactions. The previous partners were struggling with debt service on their office lease and equipment loans, and they were facing potential dissolution due to insufficient cash flow. My acquisition provided the capital infusion necessary to maintain operations while preserving the firm's reputation and client relationships. David finally found his voice, though his earlier confidence had been replaced by confusion and growing anger. "Why did you not tell me that you owned Victoria's firm? This entire meeting is some kind of setup designed to humiliate me." "Actually, David, this meeting is exactly what you requested," I replied. "You scheduled a prenuptial modification review with your chosen attorney to develop terms that would protect your interests while limiting mine. The fact that your attorney happens to work for me is simply an interesting coincidence that reveals how much you still do not understand about the woman you claim to want to marry." Victoria was reviewing the ownership documents with the methodical attention of someone calculating the extent of her professional exposure. Her representation of David against my interests while I controlled her law practice created ethical violations that could destroy her career, and she was clearly beginning to understand the precarious position her advocacy had created. "Ms. Mitchell," Victoria said carefully, "I was not aware of your ownership interest in the firm when Mr. Harrison retained my services. Had I known about this relationship, I would have advised him to seek independent counsel to avoid any appearance of conflict." "I am sure you would have," I replied. "However, your lack of awareness about your firm's ownership structure raises interesting questions about your attention to business operations and fiduciary responsibilities. Most partners would be expected to understand who controls their practice and employment security." The comment was deliberately provocative, designed to highlight Victoria's professional carelessness while emphasizing the power dynamic that now governed our relationship. Her aggressive advocacy for David's interests had been premised on the assumption that she was independent of my influence, but that independence had been illusory from the beginning of their attorney-client relationship. David was beginning to process the broader implications of the revelation beyond the immediate prenuptial complications. His real estate development business depended on professional relationships and reputation within the business community, and his association with ethical violations involving attorney conflicts of interest could damage his credibility with clients, investors, and regulatory authorities. "Sarah, we need to discuss this situation privately," David said, his tone combining frustration with growing desperation. "This is clearly a complicated situation that requires careful handling to protect everyone's interests." "I agree completely," I replied, beginning to gather the documents I had shared during the meeting. "The situation is indeed complicated, particularly for Victoria, who will need to withdraw from representing you immediately while dealing with potential disciplinary proceedings related to her conflict of interest." Victoria was now fully engaged with damage control planning. Her legal training focused on minimizing her exposure while protecting her professional reputation. "Mr. Harrison, I will need to terminate our representation immediately and provide you with referrals to qualified independent counsel who can assist you with your prenuptial agreement needs." "That seems wise," I agreed. "David, you are certainly entitled to legal representation that serves your interests exclusively. I recommend choosing an attorney who has no business relationship with me, which should significantly expand your available options." The meeting that David had expected to conclude with favorable prenuptial terms had instead exposed his deceptive planning, while creating professional crisis for his attorney and forcing him to start over with new legal counsel who would charge additional fees for reviewing work that Victoria could no longer complete. More significantly, the revelation had fundamentally altered the power dynamics in our relationship, while demonstrating that David's assessment of my resources and strategic capabilities had been completely inaccurate. His assumption that he could manipulate our financial arrangements through superior legal representation had been based on fundamental misunderstanding of my professional network and business investments. As I prepared to leave the conference room, I realized that this meeting represented a perfect example of why careful preparation and strategic thinking often triumph over aggressive tactics and superficial advantages. David's confidence in his approach had been based on incomplete information, while my quiet preparation had created opportunities that neither he nor Victoria had anticipated. The prenuptial agreement modification that was supposed to protect David's interests had instead revealed his willingness to deceive his partner, while exposing his fundamental lack of respect for my intelligence and autonomy. More importantly, it had provided clear evidence that our relationship was based on his desire to control, rather than genuine partnership and mutual respect. Walking toward the parking garage, I felt a sense of clarity about both my professional capabilities and my personal relationship with David that had been building for months but crystallized during the meeting. The woman who had quietly acquired a prestigious law practice while maintaining her consulting career was clearly capable of managing her own financial interests without compromising prenuptial agreements designed to benefit her partner at her expense. The path forward would require difficult conversations and complex decisions, but for the first time in months I felt confident about my ability to navigate those challenges successfully while protecting my interests and maintaining my professional integrity. The meeting had ended exactly as it should have, with truth revealed and power dynamics clarified through honest disclosure rather than continued deception. David would need to decide whether he wanted a genuine partnership with someone who possessed both financial resources and strategic intelligence, or whether he preferred to find a different partner who would accept the subordinate role he seemed determined to establish through legal manipulation. Either way, I was finally clear about both my capabilities and my worth, and that clarity would guide every decision I made about our relationship moving forward. The decision to acquire Sterling, Matthews & Associates had been born from necessity rather than ambition, though the strategic implications would not become clear until months later, when David arranged his ill-fated prenuptial modification meeting. 14 months earlier, I had been conducting routine due diligence on a client's divorce proceedings, when I discovered that their attorney's law firm was facing financial collapse due to unsustainable debt obligations and declining revenue streams. The revelation had come during a late evening phone call from Patricia Sterling, Victoria's mother and founding partner of the prestigious family law practice. Patricia had built the firm's reputation over 25 years of aggressive advocacy for high-net-worth clients, establishing Sterling, Matthews & Associates as the premier destination for complex divorce proceedings and sophisticated estate planning throughout the metropolitan area. However, her recent diagnosis with early-onset Alzheimer's disease had forced her to step back from active practice, while the firm struggled to maintain its operational standards and financial stability. "Sarah, I am calling because your reputation in financial consulting has reached our professional community, and I believe you might be interested in a unique investment opportunity," Patricia had explained during that initial conversation. "The firm is facing challenges that require both immediate capital infusion and long-term strategic management from someone who understands both legal operations and complex financial structures." The opportunity she presented was simultaneously attractive and daunting. Sterling, Matthews & Associates possessed exceptional client relationships, valuable intellectual property in the form of legal precedents and case strategies, and a prime office location that conveyed prestige and success to potential clients. However, the firm was also burdened with substantial lease obligations, equipment financing agreements, and overhead costs that exceeded current revenue by significant margins. Patricia's daughter Victoria had been assuming increased responsibility for firm operations, but her expertise lay in legal advocacy rather than business management and strategic planning. The disconnect between her professional capabilities and the firm's administrative requirements had created operational inefficiencies that compounded their financial pressures while threatening the service quality that had built their reputation. Victoria is an exceptional attorney whose advocacy skills have maintained our client satisfaction and case success rates, Patricia continued. However, she has never demonstrated interest in or aptitude for the business development and financial management aspects of law firm operations. The firm needs someone who can provide strategic leadership while allowing Victoria to focus on her legal practice strengths. The proposal was elegant in its structure and compelling in its potential returns. Patricia was offering to sell majority ownership of the firm to someone who could provide immediate capital infusion while implementing strategic management that would restore financial stability and position the practice for sustained growth. The acquisition would include all firm assets, client relationships, and intellectual property, but would also require assumption of existing debt obligations and responsibility for ongoing operational expenses. More intriguingly, the acquisition structure would allow the new owner to maintain operational control while preserving the firm's established reputation and professional relationships. Victoria would continue serving as the public face of the practice, handling client relationships and legal proceedings, while the new owner would manage strategic planning, financial operations, and business development activities behind the scenes. I spent the following 3 weeks conducting comprehensive due diligence that revealed both significant challenges and extraordinary opportunities within the firm's operations. The financial analysis confirmed Patricia's assessment that immediate intervention was necessary to prevent bankruptcy, but it also demonstrated that the firm's underlying assets and market position were fundamentally sound despite their current difficulties. The client base included numerous high-net-worth individuals and successful business owners who valued the firm's expertise and were willing to pay premium rates for sophisticated legal services. The case success rate was exceptional, with favorable outcomes in over 85% of contested proceedings, and client retention rates exceeded industry averages by substantial margins. Most importantly, the firm's reputation for ethical practice and professional competence had remained intact despite their financial struggles. However, the operational analysis revealed systematic inefficiencies that had been developing over several years, as Patricia's declining involvement had created leadership vacuum. Case management systems were outdated and inconsistent, billing procedures were irregular and often delayed, and client communication protocols varied depending on which attorney was handling specific matters. These operational problems were reducing profitability while creating client satisfaction issues that could damage the firm's reputation if not addressed promptly. The acquisition proposal I developed addressed both immediate financial needs and long-term strategic development. The purchase price would provide sufficient capital to satisfy existing debt obligations while creating operational reserves for implementing necessary improvements. The management structure would preserve Victoria's professional autonomy while establishing systematic oversight that would ensure consistent service quality and financial accountability. Most importantly, the acquisition would be structured to protect both parties' interests while creating potential for substantial returns if the firm's operations could be optimized effectively. Patricia would receive immediate financial security for her retirement while maintaining legacy protection for the practice she had built over decades. Victoria would continue practicing law with reduced administrative burdens while benefiting from improved resources and systematic support. I would gain control of valuable assets while assuming responsibility for generating returns sufficient to justify the investment risks. The negotiation process required 6 weeks of careful discussion about operational procedures, management responsibilities, and performance expectations. Patricia's legal expertise ensured that all agreements were properly documented and enforceable, while her personal investment in the firm's continued success motivated her to structure terms that would encourage effective management and sustainable growth. The most complex aspect of the negotiation involved establishing Victoria's role within the new ownership structure. Patricia was determined to protect her daughter's professional interests, while acknowledging that Victoria's resistance to business management activities had contributed to the firm's financial difficulties. The solution we developed allowed Victoria to maintain her partnership status and client relationships, while transferring strategic decision-making authority to the new ownership structure. Victoria is an excellent attorney who genuinely cares about her clients and maintains high professional standards, Patricia explained during one of our final negotiation sessions. However, she has always preferred to focus on legal work rather than administrative responsibilities, and that preference has created challenges as the firm's complexity has increased over the years. The arrangement we established would allow Victoria to concentrate on legal practice while benefiting from improved operational support and strategic direction. She would retain her partnership title and client relationships, but major business decisions would require approval from the new ownership structure. The compromise preserved her professional dignity while ensuring that business operations would receive necessary attention and systematic management. The acquisition closed on a Tuesday morning in March, with document signing conducted in the same conference room, where Victoria would later present her prenuptial modifications to David and me. Patricia attended the closing ceremony despite her increasing cognitive limitations, and her pride in preserving the firm's legacy was evident in her careful review of every document and her detailed questions about future operational plans. I am confident that this arrangement will serve everyone's interests while maintaining the professional standards that have defined this practice, she said as we concluded the transaction. The firm will continue serving clients effectively, while adapting to changing market conditions and operational requirements. Victoria's reaction to the ownership transition had been professionally cordial but personally distant. She understood the financial necessity that had motivated the sale, and she appreciated that the acquisition would allow her to continue practicing law without the administrative burdens that had been consuming increasing amounts of her time. However, her natural independence and competitive instincts made her uncomfortable with accountability to someone outside the legal profession. I appreciate that your involvement will improve our operational efficiency and financial stability, Victoria had said during our initial post-acquisition meeting. However, I want to ensure that client service remains our primary focus, and that legal decisions continue to be made based on professional judgment rather than business considerations. The concern was reasonable and reflected her commitment to maintaining the ethical standards that had built the firm's reputation. I assured her that client service quality would remain the highest priority, and that legal decisions would continue reflecting professional judgment rather than financial pressures. The new ownership structure was designed to support excellent legal work by providing better resources and systematic operations, not to interfere with professional decision-making processes. The operational improvements I implemented during the following months had generated exactly the results anticipated during due diligence analysis. Updated case management systems improved efficiency while ensuring consistent client communication and documentation standards. Revised billing procedures accelerated payment collection while providing clearer information about service costs and value delivered. Enhanced marketing strategies attracted new clients while maintaining the firm's reputation for sophisticated legal services. Most importantly, the financial restructuring had eliminated the debt pressures that had been threatening the firm's survival, while creating reserves for continued investment in professional development and operational improvements. Within 6 months, the practice was generating positive cash flow while maintaining the service quality that had attracted premium clients throughout its history. Victoria's adaptation to the new ownership structure had been gradual but ultimately successful. Her initial resistance to operational changes had diminished, as she recognized that systematic procedures actually enhanced her ability to serve clients effectively while reducing the administrative tasks that she had always found burdensome. The improved resources and support systems allowed her to focus on legal work rather than business management, and her productivity and client satisfaction rates had improved accordingly. However, Victoria's limited involvement in strategic planning and business operations had left her unaware of many aspects of the firm's new ownership structure. She understood that new management had improved financial stability and operational efficiency, but she had not inquired about specific details regarding ownership identity or decision-making authority. This information gap would prove significant when David approached her about representing his interests in prenuptial modification proceedings. The irony of Victoria representing David against my interests while I controlled her professional livelihood had been genuinely unintentional on my part. When David had mentioned retaining family law counsel to assist with prenuptial modifications, I had assumed he would work with one of several qualified attorneys whose practices served the business community where his real estate development activities had established professional relationships. His selection of Victoria Sterling had surprised me, but I had not initially recognized the potential implications of his choice. David had presented his legal consultation as routine preparation for marriage, and I had no reason to suspect that he was planning to restructure our prenuptial agreement in ways that would disadvantage my financial interests while protecting his assets from marital property claims. The revelation of his intentions had emerged gradually through conversations that seemed casual but revealed systematic planning designed to limit my financial rights while expanding his control over marital assets and future earnings. His suggestions about would essentially render me financially dependent on his goodwill throughout our marriage. The discovery that Victoria was representing David in developing these disadvantageous terms while I controlled her law practice had created a situation that was simultaneously professionally problematic and personally illuminating. Victoria's aggressive advocacy for David's interests demonstrated either profound ignorance about her firm's ownership structure or deliberate disregard for the ethical implications of representing clients against her ultimate employer's interests. More significantly, David's willingness to pursue legal strategies designed to disadvantage his fiancée, while maintaining a facade of partnership and commitment, had revealed fundamental character issues that cast doubt on his suitability as a life partner. His deceptive approach to prenuptial modification suggested that he viewed marriage as a business transaction to be managed for his benefit rather than a partnership based on mutual respect and shared interests. The meeting where these dynamics would be revealed had been approaching for weeks while I considered how to address the situation effectively. David's confidence in his strategic advantages had been evident in his casual references to protecting our interests and ensuring, quote, proper legal frameworks for our financial arrangements. Victoria's reputation for aggressive client advocacy had clearly convinced him that he would secure favorable terms regardless of my preferences or concerns. However, their mutual confidence had been premised on incomplete information about both my resources and my strategic capabilities. David's assessment of my financial position and business relationships had been based on assumptions rather than comprehensive knowledge, while Victoria's representation of his interests had proceeded without adequate attention to potential conflicts or ethical complications. The preparation I had undertaken for the prenuptial modification meeting had been systematic and thorough, reflecting the same analytical approach that had enabled me to identify and acquire Sterling, Matthews and Associates when it was facing financial difficulties. Rather than reacting emotionally to David's proposed modifications or confronting Victoria directly about ethical concerns, I had developed a strategic response that would address both issues simultaneously, while demonstrating the inadequacy of their assumptions about my capabilities and resources. The documents I had assembled for the meeting included complete information about the firm's acquisition, current ownership structure, and operational management arrangements. The corporate filings, partnership agreements, and financial statements provided objective evidence that would be difficult to dispute or minimize, while the legal language would be immediately comprehensible to Victoria, despite the shocking implications for her professional situation. More importantly, the revelation would demonstrate to David that his assessment of my business sophistication and strategic resources had been fundamentally inaccurate. The woman he had assumed he could manipulate through superior legal representation had actually been controlling his attorney's professional livelihood while developing her own complex business investments and strategic relationships. The anticipation I felt as the meeting approached was not vindictive satisfaction at their coming embarrassment, but rather professional confidence in my preparation and strategic thinking. The situation David and Victoria had created would be resolved through honest disclosure and systematic analysis, rather than continued deception and manipulation. Their reactions to the revelation would provide valuable information about their character and judgment that would inform my decisions about both professional and personal relationships moving forward. The morning of the meeting had arrived with the crisp clarity that often accompanies significant events, and I had felt prepared for whatever developments might emerge from the confrontation between their assumptions and the reality of my actual position and capabilities. The silence that followed my revelation extended for nearly 45 seconds, during which Victoria Sterling processed the full implications of representing David Harrison against the interests of the woman who controlled her professional livelihood, while David struggled to comprehend how thoroughly his strategic planning had been undermined by information he had never possessed. The conference room that had moments earlier buzzed with their confident presentation of revised prenuptial terms now felt heavy with the weight of ethical violations, professional misconduct, and relationship deceptions that required immediate attention and careful resolution. Victoria was the first to speak, her legal training enabling her to focus on practical damage control despite the personal and professional shock she was experiencing. Ms. Mitchell, I need to understand the timeline of your acquisition relative to Mr. Harrison's retention of my services. The ethical implications of this representation depend significantly on when these relationships were established and what information was available during our initial consultations. Her question demonstrated both professional competence and genuine concern about the scope of her ethical exposure. The model rules of professional conduct governing attorney behavior contained specific provisions regarding conflicts of interest that could result in disciplinary sanctions, malpractice liability, and potential disbarment depending on the severity of violations and the circumstances surrounding them. Victoria's aggressive advocacy for terms that would disadvantage me while I held ultimate authority over her employment and partnership status represented precisely the type of conflict that professional ethics rules were designed to prevent. Your retention by David began approximately 6 weeks ago. I replied, consulting my phone calendar to provide precise dates. My acquisition of Sterling Matthews & Associates was completed 14 months ago, which means that your representation of his interests against mine has been occurring under circumstances that constituted a clear conflict of interest from the beginning of your attorney-client relationship. The timeline I provided eliminated any possibility that Victoria's representation had been established before my ownership of her practice, which meant that her advocacy for David's interests had been conducted in direct violation of professional ethics standards throughout their entire working relationship. The ethical violation was not a technical oversight that could be resolved through corrective measures, but rather a fundamental breach of professional responsibility that had continued for weeks while she developed strategies designed to disadvantage her ultimate employer. David was beginning to process the broader implications beyond the immediate prenuptial complications, and his expression reflected growing understanding that his situation extended far beyond relationship difficulties with his fiancée. His association with Victoria's ethical violations could potentially damage his reputation within the business community, where his real estate development activities depended on professional credibility and trustworthy relationships with clients, investors, and regulatory authorities. Sarah, I had no knowledge of your ownership of Victoria's firm when I retained her services, David said, his tone combining defensiveness with growing desperation. This situation appears to be coincidental rather than deliberate, and I believe we can resolve it through appropriate modifications to our legal arrangements. His attempt to characterize the situation as coincidental rather than systematic planning revealed his continued failure to understand the fundamental issues that my revelation had exposed. The conflict of interest problem could indeed be resolved through Victoria's immediate withdrawal from representation, but the deeper problems of his deceptive approach to prenuptial modification and his willingness to pursue legal strategies designed to disadvantage his partner could not be addressed through simple procedural corrections. The coincidental nature of your selection of Victoria as counsel does not eliminate the ethical problems created by her representation, I replied, maintaining the professional tone that had characterized my participation throughout the meeting. More significantly, the coincidence has revealed important information about your intentions regarding our marriage and your assessment of my business capabilities that requires serious consideration regardless of how the immediate legal issues are resolved. Victoria was already preparing withdrawal documentation while calculating the potential scope of her professional liability exposure. Her representation of David had involved substantial time investment and strategic planning that would now generate no revenue, while creating potential claims for malpractice damages if David could demonstrate harm resulting from her conflicted representation. More seriously, the ethical violation would need to be reported to disciplinary authorities, potentially triggering investigation of her professional conduct and judgment. Mr. Harrison, I am preparing immediate withdrawal from representation along with referrals to qualified independent counsel, who can assist you with your prenuptial agreement needs, Victoria said, her professional composure returning as she focused on damage control procedures. The conflict of interest created by Ms. Mitchell's ownership of this firm requires immediate termination of our attorney-client relationship to prevent additional ethical violations. The withdrawal process would require Victoria to return all materials David had provided while ensuring that he had access to qualified replacement counsel, who could review the work she had completed before the conflict was discovered. However, the replacement attorney would likely charge additional fees for reviewing Victoria's analysis and recommendations, effectively increasing David's legal costs, while delaying his prenuptial modification timeline. Additionally, Victoria continued, you should be aware that the conflict of interest may affect the validity of any advice I have provided regarding your prenuptial strategy. Independent counsel will need to review all recommendations and legal analysis to ensure that your interests have been properly represented despite the ethical complications surrounding my involvement. The caveat Victoria provided introduced additional complexity that David had not anticipated when he developed his confidence in securing favorable prenuptial modifications. Any legal strategy she had developed while operating under conflict of interest could be challenged as potentially compromised by divided loyalties, which meant that his replacement attorney would need to conduct independent analysis of all issues rather than simply implementing her recommendations. I observed their professional crisis management while considering the broader implications for my personal relationship with David and my business relationship with Victoria. The immediate ethical problems would be resolved through proper withdrawal procedures and disciplinary reporting, but the underlying trust issues and character revelations would require more complex analysis and decision-making processes. David's willingness to pursue prenuptial modifications, designed to limit my financial rights while maintaining a facade of partnership, had revealed fundamental dishonesty about his intentions and his respect for my autonomy. His surprise at discovering my ownership of Victoria's firm demonstrated that his assessment of my business capabilities and professional relationships had been based on incomplete information and unwarranted assumptions, rather than genuine knowledge of my activities and accomplishments. More troubling was his apparent comfort with legal strategies that would render me financially dependent on his goodwill throughout our marriage. The revised terms Victoria had presented would have effectively eliminated my economic security while protecting his assets from any claims I might have as his spouse, creating power dynamics that were fundamentally incompatible with genuine partnership and mutual respect. Victoria's participation in developing these disadvantageous terms while operating under conflict of interest raised equally serious concerns about her professional judgment and ethical sensitivity. Even without knowledge of my ownership of her firm, her willingness to advocate aggressively for terms that would leave David's fiancée financially vulnerable suggested either inadequate consideration of broader ethical responsibilities or deliberate disregard for the welfare of individuals who were not her direct clients. Victoria, I need to understand your assessment of the prenuptial modifications you were preparing to recommend, I said, addressing the substance of their proposal rather than simply the procedural ethics violations. Setting aside the conflict of interest issues, do you believe that terms which would render one party financially dependent on the other's goodwill represent appropriate frameworks for marriage agreements? The question was designed to assess Victoria's professional values beyond her technical legal competence. Her response would provide insight into whether her aggressive advocacy for David's interests reflected standard professional practice or demonstrated judgment problems that extended beyond the immediate conflict situation. Victoria paused before responding, clearly recognizing that her answer would be evaluated by the person who controlled her professional livelihood, while potentially being used in disciplinary proceedings that could affect her career prospects. Ms. Mitchell, prenuptial agreements frequently include terms that provide different levels of financial protection for parties with substantially different asset levels or income potential. My recommendations to Mr. Harrison were based on standard protective strategies rather than deliberate attempts to create financial dependence. Her response demonstrated professional defensiveness rather than genuine engagement with the ethical implications of the terms she had been advocating. The distinction between standard protective strategies and creating financial dependence was largely semantic when the practical effect would have been identical regardless of the terminology used to describe the arrangements. I understand that prenuptial agreements often address asset protection concerns, I replied. However, I am specifically asking whether you believe that agreements which eliminate economic security for one party while maximizing control for the other represent appropriate foundations for marriages that are supposed to be based on partnership and mutual respect. The more direct formulation of my question eliminated Victoria's ability to hide behind technical legal language while forcing her to address the fundamental relationship dynamics that her recommended terms would have created. Her response would reveal whether she understood the broader implications of her advocacy or whether she viewed prenuptial agreements purely as technical legal documents without consideration for their impact on marriage relationships. Prenuptial agreements serve important functions in protecting premarital assets and clarifying financial responsibilities, Victoria said, maintaining her defensive posture. The specific terms must be negotiated between the parties based on their individual circumstances and preferences rather than predetermined concepts of appropriate relationship dynamics. Her continued avoidance of direct engagement with the ethical implications suggested that Victoria either genuinely did not understand the problematic aspects of the terms she had been recommending, or was deliberately avoiding acknowledgement of their potential harm to maintain her professional position despite the conflict situation. David was growing increasingly frustrated with the focus on broader relationship implications rather than immediate procedural solutions that might preserve some version of his prenuptial modification objectives. Sarah, we can address these relationship concerns through private discussion after we resolve the immediate legal complications. Victoria's withdrawal from representation will eliminate the conflict issues, and we can continue our prenuptial planning with independent counsel who can provide appropriate guidance. His suggestion that relationship concerns could be separated from legal strategy demonstrated continued failure to understand that the problems my revelation had exposed were fundamental rather than procedural. The discovery that he had been planning to manipulate our financial arrangements through legal mechanisms while presenting himself as committed to genuine partnership had revealed character issues that could not be resolved through simple attorney substitution. David, the legal complications are symptoms of deeper problems rather than isolated issues that can be resolved through procedural corrections, I replied. Your willingness to pursue prenuptial terms that would disadvantage me financially while maintaining deception about your intentions suggests fundamental incompatibility with the partnership approach to marriage that I had assumed we shared. The conversation was moving beyond immediate conflict resolution toward more fundamental evaluation of our relationship compatibility, but this progression was necessary to address the real issues that the meeting had revealed. David's reaction to being confronted with evidence of his deceptive planning would provide important information about his character and his capacity for honest self-assessment that would influence my decision-making about our future together. Victoria began organizing her materials for withdrawal while monitoring our relationship discussion, with the obvious discomfort of someone who recognized that her professional crisis was occurring within the context of broader relationship dynamics that could affect her future employment security, regardless of how the immediate ethics issues were resolved. Ms. Mitchell, I want to ensure that the withdrawal process addresses all professional obligations while minimizing disruption to both your business operations and Mr. Harrison's legal needs, Victoria said, attempting to refocus attention on manageable professional tasks rather than the more complex personal implications of the situation. I appreciate your attention to professional responsibilities, I replied. However, the withdrawal process will also need to include comprehensive assessment of how the conflict of interest may have affected the quality of legal advice provided to David, along with appropriate notification to disciplinary authorities as required by professional conduct rules. The reminder that disciplinary reporting would be necessary regardless of how cooperatively the withdrawal proceeded served to emphasize the seriousness of Victoria's ethical violation while ensuring that all parties understood the potential consequences that extended beyond immediate relationship. David was beginning to recognize that his legal strategy had created problems that could not be easily contained or resolved through simple procedural adjustments. The combination of ethical violations, potential disciplinary proceedings, increased legal costs for replacement counsel, and relationship trust issues represented a cascade of negative consequences that resulted directly from his decision to pursue deceptive prenuptial modification strategies. This entire situation has become unnecessarily complicated due to coincidental circumstances that none of us could have anticipated, David said, making one final attempt to characterize the problems as unfortunate accidents rather than consequences of his deliberate choices. I believe we can work through these challenges if everyone focuses on constructive solutions rather than dwelling on perceived problems. His characterization of fundamental trust violations and ethical misconduct as perceived problems demonstrated either genuine inability to understand the significance of his actions or deliberate minimization designed to avoid accountability for the consequences his planning had created. Either explanation raised serious questions about his suitability as a marriage partner for someone who valued honesty, integrity, and mutual respect in personal relationships. The meeting that David had scheduled to secure favorable prenuptial terms had instead exposed deceptive planning, created professional crisis for his attorney, and revealed character deficiencies that threatened the foundation of our relationship. The strategic advantages he had assumed he possessed had been transformed into liabilities through the simple revelation of information he had never bothered to investigate, demonstrating how thoroughly his assessment of my capabilities and resources had been incomplete. As I prepared to conclude the meeting, I realized that the confrontation had achieved everything necessary to clarify the situation, while providing each party with complete information needed for appropriate decision-making moving forward. David would need to decide whether he was capable of genuine partnership with someone who possessed both financial resources and strategic intelligence, while Victoria would need to address her professional obligations and ethical violations through appropriate channels and procedures. The path forward would require difficult conversations and complex decisions, but the foundation for those discussions was now honest and complete, rather than based on deception and incomplete information that had characterized the relationship dynamics prior to this revelation. The immediate aftermath of the conference room revelation required careful navigation of multiple professional and personal relationships that had been fundamentally altered by the disclosure of information that none of the participants had expected to encounter during what was supposed to be a routine prenuptial modification meeting. The 48 hours following our confrontation would prove decisive in determining not only the resolution of immediate ethical and legal complications, but also the long-term trajectory of careers, business relationships, and personal commitments that had been built on assumptions that were no longer tenable. Victoria Sterling's response to her professional crisis demonstrated both the analytical capabilities that had made her successful in family law practice and the strategic limitations that had contributed to her current predicament. Within 6 hours of our meeting, she had completed comprehensive withdrawal documentation that terminated her representation of David while providing him with detailed referrals to qualified independent counsel who specialized in prenuptial agreement development and had no business relationships that might create additional conflict complications. Her withdrawal letter to David was professionally crafted and legally thorough, acknowledging the conflict of interest that required immediate termination of their attorney-client relationship, while carefully avoiding any admissions that might increase her liability exposure in potential malpractice claims or disciplinary proceedings. The document demonstrated her technical legal competence while revealing her focus on damage control, rather than genuine acceptance of responsibility for the ethical lapses that had created the crisis. Mr. Harrison, the conflict of interest created by circumstances that were not apparent during our initial consultations requires immediate termination of my representation in accordance with professional conduct rules governing attorney behavior, Victoria wrote in her withdrawal communication. I have prepared comprehensive materials documenting the analysis completed during our working relationship, along with referrals to qualified counsel who can provide independent representation for your prenuptial planning needs. The language Victoria employed was carefully neutral, characterizing her conflict as resulting from circumstances that were not apparent, rather than acknowledging her failure to conduct adequate due diligence about her firm's ownership structure before accepting representation that placed her interests in direct opposition to those of her ultimate employer. This characterization suggested that Victoria viewed her ethical violation as an unfortunate coincidence rather than a professional failure that reflected inadequate attention to fundamental business operations affecting her practice. More significantly, Victoria's withdrawal materials included no acknowledgement of the substantive concerns I had raised about the prenuptial terms she had been advocating. Her focus remained entirely on procedural compliance with professional conduct requirements rather than genuine consideration of whether her aggressive advocacy for arrangements that would financially disadvantage David's fiancée represented appropriate professional judgment regardless of technical ethical compliance. The referral attorneys Victoria recommended were competent professionals with established reputations for sophisticated family law practice, but her selection criteria appeared to emphasize technical expertise rather than ethical sensitivity or commitment to balanced representation that would consider both parties' legitimate interests. This approach suggested that Victoria continued to view prenuptial agreements as adversarial proceedings rather than collaborative planning exercises designed to establish frameworks for successful marriages. David's response to Victoria's withdrawal was characterized by frustration, rather than understanding of the ethical principles that required immediate termination of their working relationship. His primary concern appeared to be the additional time and expense that would be required to engage replacement counsel, rather than genuine consideration of the professional misconduct that had compromised the legal advice he had received during their representation period. Sarah, this withdrawal creates unnecessary delays and additional costs that could have been avoided through better communication about your business relationships. David complained during a phone conversation the evening after our conference room meeting. Victoria's recommendations were sound legal strategy regardless of who owns her firm, and requiring her to withdraw seems excessive, given that the conflict was unintentional. His characterization of Victoria's ethical violation as a communication problem rather than professional misconduct demonstrated continued failure to understand the fundamental principles governing attorney conduct, and the reasons why conflict of interest rules existed to protect both clients and the broader legal system. David's focus on inconvenience and expense rather than ethical implications suggested that his approach to professional relationships was primarily transactional, rather than based on integrity and accountability standards. More troubling was David's continued defense of the prenuptial terms Victoria had been advocating, despite the revelation that her representation had been conducted under circumstances that violated professional ethics requirements. His assertion that her recommendations constituted sound legal strategy, regardless of ethical complications, indicated that he remained committed to pursuing arrangements that would disadvantage me financially while protecting his assets from marital property claims. The conversation revealed that David viewed the conflict of interest disclosure as an obstacle to be managed rather than information that should prompt genuine reconsideration of his approach to our prenuptial agreement and his broader relationship strategy. His resistance to acknowledging the ethical dimensions of Victoria's misconduct paralleled his reluctance to examine his own deceptive planning and the implications of his willingness to pursue legal arrangements designed to limit my financial security. David, the withdrawal requirement reflects fundamental professional ethics principles rather than excessive response to technical violations. I explained during our conversation. Victoria's representation of your interests while I controlled her professional livelihood created precisely the type of divided loyalty that professional conduct rules are designed to prevent, and the seriousness of this violation cannot be minimized through characterization as communication problems. My response was designed to educate David about ethical principles while assessing his capacity for genuine understanding of the professional standards that governed legal practice and business relationships. His reaction would provide important information about his character and judgment that would influence my evaluation of his suitability as a marriage partner and business associate. The more significant issue, I continued, is that your willingness to pursue prenuptial modifications designed to disadvantage me financially while maintaining deception about your intentions suggests fundamental problems with your approach to partnership and mutual respect that extend far beyond immediate legal complications. The broader relationship assessment I initiated was necessary to address the underlying trust and compatibility issues that the prenuptial modification attempt had revealed. David's response to direct confrontation about his deceptive planning would indicate whether he possessed the self-awareness and integrity necessary for genuine partnership in marriage, or whether his primary interest remained control and advantage over his prospective spouse. During the following days, David's behavior demonstrated consistent patterns of deflection and minimization, rather than honest self-examination or genuine accountability for the consequences his planning had created. His conversations with replacement counsel appeared to focus on achieving similar outcomes through different legal strategies, rather than reconsidering whether his fundamental approach to prenuptial planning was appropriate for building successful marriage relationships. The new attorney David selected was Marcus Webb, a family law specialist whose reputation emphasized aggressive advocacy and technical expertise, rather than collaborative approach or ethical sensitivity. Webb's initial consultation with David resulted in recommendations that were substantively similar to Victoria's proposals, suggesting that David had specifically sought counsel who would support his objectives rather than challenge his assumptions about appropriate marriage planning strategies. Webb's approach to prenuptial development reflected the adversarial mindset that had characterized Victoria's representation, treating the agreement negotiation as a zero-sum competition, rather than collaborative planning designed to establish frameworks for mutual success and shared prosperity throughout the marriage. His recommendations included sophisticated trust structures and asset protection mechanisms that would achieve David's control objectives through different legal instruments, rather than reconsidering whether such control was consistent with genuine partnership. Ms. Mitchell, my client is committed to establishing clear financial frameworks that protect both parties' interests while providing appropriate security for the marriage relationship, Webb wrote in his initial communication to me. The proposed agreement terms reflect contemporary best practices in sophisticated estate planning, rather than attempts to disadvantage either party unfairly. Webb's characterization of David's objectives as reflecting contemporary best practices rather than control-oriented planning, demonstrated either genuine misunderstanding of the power dynamics the proposed terms would create, or deliberate misrepresentation designed to make disadvantageous arrangements seem reasonable and standard. Either explanation raised concerns about whether David's new counsel would provide better guidance than Victoria's compromised representation had offered. The pattern that was emerging suggested that David's response to having his deceptive planning exposed was to seek alternative methods for achieving similar objectives rather than fundamental reconsideration of his approach to marriage partnership. His selection of counsel, whose reputation emphasized aggressive advocacy rather than collaborative problem-solving, indicated that he remained committed to pursuing advantage rather than genuine mutual benefit in our relationship planning. Victoria's handling of her professional crisis provided additional insights into her character and judgment that would influence my future business relationships with Sterling Matthews and Associates. Her immediate focus on liability protection rather than genuine accountability suggested that her professional values emphasized technical compliance rather than broader ethical responsibility to clients and the legal system. The disciplinary reporting process that professional conduct rules required would provide objective assessment of Victoria's ethical violation while establishing precedent that might influence her future professional behavior. However, her response to the crisis had already demonstrated that she viewed ethical compliance primarily as risk management, rather than fundamental professional responsibility that extended beyond minimum regulatory requirements. Ms. Mitchell, I want to ensure that the firm's operations continue meeting all professional standards while we address the complications created by this conflict situation, Victoria said during our first business meeting following David's withdrawal. I believe we can implement enhanced conflict checking procedures that will prevent similar problems from occurring in future client representations. Victoria's focus on procedural improvements rather than substantive examination of her professional judgment suggested that she understood the conflict situation as a technical oversight, rather than a fundamental failure to maintain awareness of her business relationships and professional obligations. Her proposed solution addressed symptoms rather than underlying causes of the ethical lapse that had created the crisis. Victoria, enhanced conflict checking procedures would certainly be beneficial for preventing technical violations, I replied. However, the more significant issue is whether the aggressive advocacy approach that characterized your representation of David against my interests reflects appropriate professional values regardless of technical conflict compliance. The question I posed was designed to assess whether Victoria understood the broader ethical dimensions of her professional practice beyond regulatory compliance requirements. Her willingness to advocate aggressively for prenuptial terms that would disadvantage her client's fiancé had raised concerns about her judgment and values that extended beyond the specific conflict of interest that had created immediate crisis. Victoria's response would determine whether she could continue operating effectively within the ethical framework I expected from professionals associated with my business enterprises, or whether her approach to legal practice was fundamentally incompatible with the integrity standards that governed my professional relationships and business operations. The assessment period following the conference room revelation was providing comprehensive information about the character and judgment of both David and Victoria that would influence my decision-making about future personal and professional relationships. Their responses to having their assumptions and planning exposed were revealing their core values and priorities in ways that normal social interactions might not have disclosed. David's continued pursuit of control-oriented prenuptial arrangements despite the exposure of his deceptive planning suggested that his primary interest in marriage was securing advantage, rather than building genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. His resistance to acknowledging the ethical dimensions of Victoria's misconduct paralleled his reluctance to examine his own behavior and its implications for our relationship compatibility. Victoria's focus on liability protection rather than genuine accountability for her professional lapses suggested that her approach to legal practice emphasized technical compliance rather than broader ethical responsibility to clients and professional communities. Her willingness to advocate aggressively for terms that would disadvantage clients, partners indicated either inadequate consideration of broader ethical obligations or deliberate prioritization of narrow client interests over systemic professional values. The information I was gathering about both individuals would prove decisive in determining the future trajectory of relationships that had been fundamentally altered by the revelation of ownership structure that had created unexpected accountability and transparency, in situations that had previously operated under assumptions of independence and adversarial positioning. The strategic repositioning that was occurring as a result of the conference room disclosure was creating opportunities for more honest and direct relationships based on complete information rather than partial knowledge and incorrect assumptions. However, the character assessment process was also revealing fundamental value differences that might prove incompatible with the collaborative and ethical approach I preferred in both personal and professional contexts. The resolution of immediate crisis issues was creating foundation for longer-term decision-making about relationships and commitments that would determine the success or failure of both marriage planning and business operations that had become unexpectedly intertwined through the ownership revelations and ethical complications that had emerged from David's prenuptial modification strategy. The week following the conference room revelation required systematic evaluation of multiple professional and personal relationships that had been fundamentally altered by the disclosure of ownership structures and ethical violations that none of the participants had anticipated. The character assessment process that had emerged from David's and Victoria's responses to their respective crises was providing comprehensive information about their values, judgment, and professional integrity that would determine the future direction of business operations, legal representations, and marriage planning that had become unexpectedly interconnected through circumstances that demanded immediate resolution. Victoria Sterling's approach to managing her professional crisis had revealed significant limitations in her understanding of ethical responsibilities that extended beyond technical regulatory compliance. Her disciplinary consultation with the State Bar Association had focused exclusively on minimizing potential sanctions rather than examining the systemic professional judgment failures that had enabled her to represent clients against her ultimate employer's interests without recognizing the inherent conflict until it was publicly exposed during our prenuptial modification meeting. The consultation report Victoria received from disciplinary counsel outlined specific remedial measures required to address her ethical violation while avoiding formal sanctions that could affect her professional licensing status. These measures included mandatory continuing education courses focused on conflict of interest identification, implementation of enhanced client intake procedures designed to prevent similar oversights, and quarterly reporting to disciplinary authorities for 18 months to ensure ongoing compliance with professional conduct standards. However, the remedial framework established by disciplinary counsel addressed only the technical aspects of Victoria's ethical lapse, without requiring examination of the substantive professional judgment issues that had characterized her aggressive advocacy for prenuptial terms designed to disadvantage David's prospective spouse. Her willingness to develop legal strategies that would render one party financially dependent on another's goodwill while maintaining the facade of balanced representation suggested fundamental problems with her approach to client service that extended beyond conflict of interest detection procedures. Victoria's presentation of the disciplinary consultation results during our business meeting demonstrated continued focus on regulatory compliance rather than genuine professional development that would address the underlying judgment issues revealed by her handling of David's representation. Her proposed operational improvements emphasized procedural modifications rather than substantive examination of the ethical framework that should govern family law practice and client advocacy in situations involving marriage planning and financial security arrangements. The enhanced conflict checking procedures I am implementing will prevent technical violations by ensuring comprehensive review of all business relationships before accepting new client representations. Victoria explained during our operational review meeting. The disciplinary counsel confirmed that these procedural improvements, combined with mandatory continuing education requirements, will address all regulatory concerns while maintaining the aggressive advocacy approach that has made the firm successful in complex family law matters. Victoria's characterization of her ethical violation as a technical procedural failure rather than a substantive professional judgment lapse indicated that she had not recognized the broader implications of her willingness to advocate for arrangements that would create fundamental power imbalances in marriage relationships. Her continued emphasis on aggressive advocacy suggested that she remained committed to adversarial approaches that treated prenuptial planning as competitive proceedings, rather than collaborative exercises designed to establish frameworks for successful partnerships. The gap between Victoria's technical compliance focus and the comprehensive ethical framework I expected from professionals associated with my business enterprises required careful consideration of whether her continued employment aligned with the integrity standards that govern my professional relationships. Her competence in legal research and case strategy was undeniable, but her apparent inability to recognize the broader ethical dimensions of client representation raised concerns about her judgment and values that could affect the firm's reputation and effectiveness in serving clients appropriately. David Harrison's response to the exposure of his deceptive prenuptial planning strategy had demonstrated consistent patterns of deflection and continued pursuit of control-oriented objectives rather than genuine reconsideration of his approach to marriage partnership. His engagement with replacement counsel Marcus Webb had resulted in development of alternative legal strategies designed to achieve similar outcomes through different mechanisms, suggesting that his primary concern remained securing financial advantage rather than establishing frameworks for genuine mutual prosperity and shared decision-making throughout the marriage. Webb's revised prenuptial proposal incorporated sophisticated trust structures and asset protection mechanisms that would effectively achieve David's control objectives while using language that obscured the practical implications of the proposed arrangements. The technical complexity of the legal instruments was designed to create appearance of balanced protection while establishing David's authority over marital financial decisions and limiting my access to economic resources that would enable independent decision-making during the marriage. Ms. Mitchell, the revised agreement framework reflects Mr. Harrison's commitment to protecting both parties' financial interests while establishing clear guidelines for asset management and decision-making throughout the marriage. Webb wrote in his presentation of the modified terms, "The trust structures and protection mechanisms included in these provisions represent sophisticated estate planning strategies rather than attempts to create unfair advantage for either party." Webb's characterization of David's control-oriented objectives as sophisticated estate planning strategies demonstrated either genuine misunderstanding of the power dynamics the proposed arrangements would create, or deliberate misrepresentation designed to make disadvantageous terms appear reasonable and professionally standard. The distinction between legitimate asset protection and systematic creation of financial dependence was fundamental to evaluating whether the proposed prenuptial terms served appropriate marriage planning objectives or represented continued pursuit of dominance and control through legal mechanisms. The pattern of behavior David had established through his initial deceptive planning, his response to having his strategy exposed, and his continued pursuit of similar objectives through alternative legal approaches provided comprehensive information about his character and values that was essential for evaluating his suitability as a marriage partner. His resistance to acknowledging the ethical dimensions of Victoria's misconduct had paralleled his reluctance to examine his own behavior and its implications for relationship compatibility based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. David's business associates and professional contacts within the real estate development community had begun expressing concerns about his involvement in ethical violations and professional misconduct that could affect his reputation and credibility in commercial transactions. The interconnected nature of professional relationships within the metropolitan business environment meant that ethical lapses in personal legal matters could generate broader consequences for business operations that depended on trust and integrity in complex financial dealings. Sarah, the complications created by this prenuptial situation are affecting my professional relationships and business development activities in ways that require immediate resolution, David acknowledged during one of our conversations following Webb's presentation of revised terms. Several clients and investors have expressed concerns about my judgment and professional associations that could impact project financing and partnership opportunities. David's recognition that his ethical lapses were generating business consequences represented the first acknowledgement he had made that his deceptive planning had created problems extending beyond immediate relationship complications. However, his focus remained on managing external perception rather than genuine examination of the character and judgment failures that had created the crisis and continued to influence his approach to both personal and professional relationships. The business impact David was experiencing provided additional leverage for ensuring that any future prenuptial discussions would be conducted transparently and collaboratively, rather than through deceptive planning designed to secure advantage at my expense. His need to restore professional credibility created incentives for demonstrating integrity and accountability that had been absent from his previous approach to marriage planning and legal strategy development. However, the fundamental question remained whether David possessed the character and judgment necessary for genuine partnership in marriage, or whether his primary interest continued to be control and advantage over his prospective spouse, regardless of the external consequences his behavior might generate. His response to business pressure would indicate whether he was capable of authentic change, or whether his modifications to behavior would be superficial adjustments designed to manage perception rather than substantive transformation of his approach to relationships and ethical responsibility. The strategic decision-making process I was conducting required systematic evaluation of both Victoria's and David's capacity for genuine professional and personal development that would align with the ethical standards and collaborative approach I required in significant business and personal relationships. The information gathering phase had revealed substantial concerns about both individuals, judgment, and values, but the assessment process needed to determine whether these concerns represented fundamental character limitations or developmental opportunities that could be addressed through appropriate guidance and accountability structures. Victoria's technical competence in established client relationships provided significant value for Sterling, Matthews and Associates operations, but her apparent limitations in ethical judgment and professional responsibility created risks for the firm's reputation and effectiveness in serving clients appropriately. The remedial measures required by disciplinary authorities would address regulatory compliance concerns, but they would not necessarily develop the broader ethical framework and professional judgment that were essential for family law practice, that involved complex relationship dynamics and financial planning considerations. The decision regarding Victoria's continued employment would need to balance her technical capabilities against the potential risks created by her judgment limitations, while establishing accountability structures that would ensure appropriate professional behavior, regardless of regulatory oversight. The firm's success and reputation depended on maintaining ethical standards that exceeded minimum regulatory requirements, while providing clients with legal services that served their legitimate interests, rather than simply achieving technical legal objectives without regard for broader consequences. David's situation required evaluation of whether his character and judgment limitations were compatible with the partnership approach to marriage that I considered essential for successful long-term relationships. His willingness to pursue deceptive planning designed to limit my financial security while maintaining facade of commitment to genuine partnership had revealed fundamental problems with his understanding of appropriate relationship dynamics and mutual respect principles. The business consequences David was experiencing as a result of his ethical lapses provided external pressure for behavioral modification, but the more significant question was whether he possessed internal motivation for genuine character development that would support successful marriage partnership based on mutual respect, shared decision-making, and collaborative approach to financial planning and life management. The assessment process was also revealing important information about my own professional and personal development that had enabled me to navigate the complex challenges created by the prenuptial modification attempt and ownership disclosure. The systematic approach I had employed in acquiring Sterling, Matthews and Associates had provided strategic advantage that neither David nor Victoria had anticipated, while my careful preparation for the conference room confrontation had enabled effective management of their deceptive planning and professional misconduct. The business acumen and strategic thinking capabilities I had demonstrated throughout the crisis management process had exceeded both David's and Victoria's expectations, while providing foundation for more sophisticated approaches to professional and personal relationship development. The confidence and competence I had displayed in managing complex business operations and ethical challenges had established credibility that would influence future negotiations and decision-making processes, regardless of how current relationship complications were ultimately resolved. The professional network and reputation I had developed through successful business operations and ethical conduct were providing resources and opportunities that expanded my options for addressing both immediate challenges and long-term objectives in ways that were independent of David's or Victoria's cooperation or approval. The financial resources and strategic capabilities I possessed created alternatives that reduced my dependence on relationships that might prove incompatible with my values and professional standards. The week of intensive evaluation and decision-making was approaching conclusion with significantly enhanced understanding of the character, capabilities, and compatibility of all parties involved in the prenuptial modification complications. The information gathered through systematic assessment of responses to crisis situations had provided comprehensive foundation for strategic decisions about future professional and personal relationships that would determine the trajectory of business operations, legal representations, and marriage planning for months and potentially years to come. The resolution framework that was emerging from this evaluation process would need to address immediate regulatory and relationship complications, while establishing foundations for long-term success based on ethical behavior, genuine partnership, and collaborative approach to complex challenges that required coordination between multiple parties with different interests and capabilities. The comprehensive assessment period had yielded sufficient information to support strategic decisions regarding both professional operations at Sterling, Matthews & Associates and personal relationship arrangements with David Harrison. The systematic evaluation of character responses to crisis situations had revealed fundamental differences in values, judgment, and ethical frameworks that required immediate resolution through decisive action rather than continued negotiation or attempted compromise between incompatible approaches to professional responsibility and personal integrity. Victoria Sterling's continued employment within the firm's structure required modification of her role and responsibilities to address the judgment limitations that had been revealed through her handling of the conflict of interest situation and her approach to prenuptial agreement development. The technical legal competence she demonstrated in case research and strategy development remained valuable for firm operations, but her apparent inability to recognize broader ethical dimensions of client representation necessitated structural changes that would provide appropriate oversight while utilizing her capabilities within defined parameters that aligned with professional integrity standards. The operational restructuring I implemented established Victoria as senior associate rather than managing partner, with responsibility for legal research, case strategy development, and client representation, under direct supervision that ensured compliance with both regulatory requirements and comprehensive ethical framework that extended beyond minimum professional conduct standards. This modification preserved her valuable technical capabilities while addressing the judgment concerns that had created professional crisis and potential liability exposure for firm operations. Victoria, the restructured role I am establishing will enable you to focus on the legal practice activities where you demonstrate exceptional competence while providing systematic oversight that ensures all client representations align with comprehensive ethical standards. I explained during our operational planning meeting. This arrangement will support your professional development while protecting both your career prospects and the firm's reputation for integrity and client service excellence. Victoria's response to the role modification demonstrated pragmatic acceptance rather than enthusiastic embrace of the accountability structures I was establishing. Her primary concern appeared to be preservation of income levels and professional status rather than genuine appreciation for the development opportunities that appropriate supervision and guidance could provide for addressing the judgment limitations that had created her current difficulties. I understand the necessity for enhanced oversight given the complications created by the recent conflict situation. Victoria replied with professional composure that masked obvious frustration with reduced autonomy and authority. I am committed to demonstrating that the technical violations do not reflect broader problems with my professional capabilities or ethical judgment. Victoria's characterization of her ethical lapse as technical violations rather than substantive professional judgment failures indicated continued resistance to acknowledging the deeper issues that the prenuptial modification situation had revealed. However, her agreement to operate within the modified structure provided foundation for monitoring her development while protecting firm operations from potential future complications that might arise from inadequate attention to ethical dimensions of client representation. The supervision framework I established included quarterly performance reviews that would assess not only technical legal competence but also ethical decision-making, client relationship management, and professional development progress in areas identified as requiring improvement. This systematic approach would provide Victoria with specific guidance for addressing her limitations while creating documentation that would support future employment decisions based on demonstrated progress rather than assumptions about professional capability. David Harrison's situation required more fundamental resolution that addressed the character and compatibility issues revealed through his deceptive prenuptial planning strategy and his response to having these deceptions exposed. The systematic evaluation of his behavior patterns had demonstrated consistent prioritization of control and advantage over genuine partnership and mutual respect, indicating fundamental incompatibility with the collaborative approach to marriage that I considered essential for successful long-term relationships. The business consequences David was experiencing as a result of his association with ethical violations and professional misconduct had created external pressure for behavioral modification, but his continued pursuit of similar control-oriented objectives through alternative legal strategies suggested that his primary motivation remained securing advantage rather than developing authentic partnership capabilities. This pattern indicated that any modifications to his behavior would likely be superficial adjustments designed to manage perception rather than substantive character development that would support successful marriage relationships. The conversation I initiated with David regarding the future of our relationship was structured to provide complete transparency about my assessment of our compatibility, while offering him opportunity to demonstrate genuine understanding of the partnership principles that would be necessary for any continuing personal relationship. His response would determine whether termination of our engagement was immediate necessity, or whether extended evaluation period might reveal capacity for authentic development that had not been apparent in his previous behavior patterns. David, the prenuptial modification strategy you pursued has revealed fundamental differences in our understanding of appropriate marriage partnership dynamics that require direct discussion before we can determine whether our relationship has a viable future. I began during our comprehensive relationship assessment meeting. Your willingness to pursue legal arrangements designed to limit my financial security while maintaining deception about your intentions suggests priorities that may be incompatible with the mutual respect and collaborative decision-making that I consider essential for successful marriage. David's initial response demonstrated continued defensiveness rather than genuine self-reflection about the implications of his behavior and its impact on relationship trust and compatibility. His focus remained on justifying his prenuptial strategy as standard protective practice, rather than acknowledging that his deceptive approach and control-oriented objectives had violated fundamental partnership principles that should govern marriage planning and financial decision-making between committed partners. Sarah, I understand that the complexity of this situation has created misunderstandings about my intentions and commitment to our partnership. David replied with carefully modulated tone that suggested prepared response rather than spontaneous, authentic communication. The prenuptial planning was intended to protect both our interests while establishing clear frameworks for financial management throughout our marriage, and I believe we can work through these concerns if we focus on constructive solutions rather than dwelling on perceived problems. David's characterization of fundamental trust violations and deceptive planning as misunderstandings and perceived problems demonstrated continued inability to acknowledge the seriousness of his behavior or its implications for relationship compatibility. His suggestion that resolution could be achieved through "constructive solutions," rather than genuine character development, indicated that he remained focused on managing immediate consequences rather than addressing underlying values and judgment issues that had created the crisis. The assessment framework I employed during our relationship evaluation was designed to determine whether David possessed capacity for authentic self-examination and character development that would support genuine partnership, or whether his approach to relationships was fundamentally oriented toward control and advantage in ways that were incompatible with mutual respect and collaborative decision-making. His responses to direct questions about his behavior and motivations would provide definitive information for making final decisions about our personal relationship future. David, I need you to explain specifically why you believed it was appropriate to pursue prenuptial modifications that would disadvantage me financially while maintaining deception about your planning process. I continued with systematic directness that eliminated opportunities for deflection or generalized responses. Your answer will help me understand whether your behavior reflects misguided strategy that can be corrected through better communication, or fundamental differences in values that make successful partnership impossible. The question I posed required David to confront directly the ethical dimensions of his behavior while providing opportunity to demonstrate genuine understanding of partnership principles that would be necessary for any continuing relationship. His response would indicate whether he possessed capacity for authentic accountability and character development, or whether his primary concern remained avoiding consequences while preserving access to advantages he had been attempting to secure through deceptive legal planning. David's answer revealed continued inability to accept responsibility for the deceptive aspects of his prenuptial strategy while maintaining focus on technical legal justifications rather than ethical considerations that should govern relationships between prospective marriage partners. His explanation emphasized standard practice in sophisticated prenuptial planning, rather than acknowledging that his approach had been designed to secure advantage at my expense while maintaining facade of commitment to genuine partnership. The prenuptial modifications I pursued were based on recommendations from qualified legal counsel and reflected standard protective strategies for individuals with substantial assets entering marriage relationships. David explained with tone that suggested irritation, with continued questioning of his judgment and professional guidance. The complexity of contemporary estate planning often requires sophisticated legal instruments that may appear advantageous to one party, but actually provide balanced protection when properly understood within comprehensive financial planning frameworks. David's response demonstrated sophisticated deflection that avoided direct engagement with the ethical dimensions of his deceptive planning, while attempting to reframe control-oriented objectives as balanced protection strategies. His continued reliance on technical legal justifications rather than ethical accountability indicated fundamental limitations in his capacity for genuine partnership that extended beyond immediate prenuptial complications to broader patterns of relationship management and personal integrity. The information David had provided through his responses to systematic questioning confirmed that termination of our engagement was necessary to protect my personal and professional interests, while avoiding continued investment in relationship that was fundamentally incompatible with partnership principles that I considered essential for successful marriage. His inability to acknowledge the problematic aspects of his behavior suggested that future difficulties were inevitable, regardless of whatever modifications he might make, to manage immediate consequences. The resolution I implemented regarding David's situation was comprehensive and final, addressing both immediate relationship termination and longer-term protection of my personal and professional interests from potential future complications that might arise from his continued attempts to secure advantage through legal or business mechanisms. The approach I employed was designed to provide clear boundaries while minimizing opportunities for continued conflict or manipulation attempts that might affect my business operations or professional relationships. David, based on our comprehensive discussion of the compatibility issues revealed through your prenuptial planning strategy, I have determined that our fundamental differences in values and approach to partnership make successful marriage impossible. I communicated with professional directness that eliminated ambiguity about my decision while providing complete explanation of the reasoning that had led to relationship termination. I am ending our engagement immediately and will be making appropriate modifications to all personal and professional arrangements that were established in anticipation of marriage. The termination process I implemented included comprehensive review of all financial arrangements, property agreements, and business relationships that had been established or modified in anticipation of marriage, with systematic reversal of any commitments that were no longer appropriate given the changed circumstances. This approach ensured complete separation of our personal and professional interests while protecting my resources and strategic position from potential future complications that might arise from David's continued pursuit of advantage through legal or business channels. The strategic outcomes achieved through systematic resolution of both professional and personal relationship complications had strengthened my position across multiple dimensions, while eliminating sources of potential future conflict and ethical compromise that could have affected business operations and personal development. The decisive action taken regarding both Victoria's role modification and David's relationship termination had created foundation for more effective professional operations and personal relationships based on genuine compatibility and shared commitment to ethical behavior and mutual respect. Victoria's acceptance of modified responsibilities within appropriate supervision structure would enable continued utilization of her technical capabilities while addressing judgment limitations that had created professional crisis and potential liability exposure. The systematic oversight and development framework would provide opportunities for her professional growth while protecting firm operations from similar complications in future client representations. David's removal from personal relationships eliminated ongoing source of potential conflict and manipulation, while protecting personal and professional interests from continued attempts to secure advantage through deceptive planning or legal strategies. The comprehensive separation of all shared arrangements had created clear boundaries that would prevent future complications, while enabling focus on professional and personal development activities that aligned with authentic values and strategic objectives. The resolution process had demonstrated the effectiveness of systematic assessment and decisive action in addressing complex professional and personal challenges that required coordination between multiple competing interests and ethical frameworks. The approach I had employed throughout the crisis management period had achieved optimal outcomes while maintaining integrity and professional standards that would support continued success in business operations and personal relationship development. The strategic position created through effective resolution of these complications provided enhanced foundation for future professional and personal growth, based on authentic partnerships and ethical business practices that aligned with comprehensive success framework extending beyond immediate financial or personal advantage to encompass broader contribution and positive impact within professional and personal communities. The immediate aftermath of resolving the professional and personal complications created by the prenuptial modification crisis had generated unexpected opportunities for business expansion and strategic development that extended far beyond the scope of the original challenges. The systematic approach employed to address ethical violations, character assessment, and relationship termination had demonstrated capabilities in crisis management and strategic decision-making that attracted attention from other business owners and professional service providers who were facing similar challenges in their own operations. Within 2 weeks of implementing the resolution framework at Sterling Matthews & Associates, 3 separate business owners had contacted me regarding potential consulting arrangements that would apply the same systematic approach to organizational challenges they were encountering in their respective industries. These inquiries represented recognition that the analytical capabilities and strategic thinking demonstrated during the legal firm crisis management could provide value for addressing complex operational problems that required both technical expertise and ethical framework development. The first inquiry originated from Patricia Morrison, owner of Morrison Financial Advisory Services, a mid-sized wealth management firm that specialized in comprehensive financial planning for high-net-worth individuals and family offices. Patricia had learned about the Sterling Matthews situation through professional networking connections and was facing similar challenges with employee accountability and professional standards that were affecting client relationships and business reputation within the financial services community. Morrison Financial Advisory Services employed 12 professional staff members, including 3 certified financial planners, 2 tax specialists, and several support personnel who managed client communications and administrative operations. The firm had established strong relationships with affluent clients, who valued sophisticated financial planning and personalized service delivery. But recent incidents involving ethical lapses and professional misconduct by 2 senior employees had created client confidence issues that threatened long-term business viability. The specific problems we are facing involve employees who have been making investment recommendations that benefit their personal financial interests rather than optimizing client outcomes, Patricia explained during our initial consultation meeting. These ethical violations have created liability exposure while damaging our reputation for integrity and client advocacy that has been essential for business development within the high-net-worth market segment. The situation Patricia described was remarkably similar to the judgment and accountability issues that had characterized Victoria Sterling's approach to client representation at the law firm. Both cases involved technically competent professionals whose ethical decision-making failures had created organizational crisis while exposing systematic problems with oversight and accountability structures that had enabled inappropriate behavior to continue undetected until external circumstances forced disclosure and resolution. Patricia's assessment of her organizational challenges demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both immediate crisis management requirements and longer-term strategic development needs that would prevent similar problems from recurring. Her request for consulting assistance focused on comprehensive review of operational procedures, employee accountability frameworks, and client service standards that would restore confidence while positioning the firm for sustained growth based on ethical practices and professional excellence. I believe the systematic approach you employed at Sterling Matthews could provide the foundation for rebuilding our professional culture while implementing accountability measures that ensure all employee behavior aligns with fiduciary responsibilities and client service excellence. Patricia continued. The reputation damage we have experienced requires comprehensive response that addresses both immediate client concerns and longer-term prevention of similar ethical failures. The opportunity Patricia presented was strategically attractive because it would enable application of organizational development capabilities in financial services context while generating consulting revenue that could support expansion of business operations beyond legal firm ownership. The systematic approach that had proven effective for addressing Victoria's judgment limitations and implementing appropriate oversight structures could be adapted for different professional service environment while building expertise in organizational development and business management consulting. The second business inquiry originated from Marcus Rodriguez, managing partner of Rodriguez Engineering Consultants, a civil engineering firm that provided infrastructure design and project management services for municipal governments and private development companies. Marcus had encountered ethical complications involving conflicts of interest and professional misconduct that were affecting client relationships and regulatory compliance within the engineering profession. Rodriguez Engineering Consultants employed 28 professional engineers and support staff who managed complex infrastructure projects that required coordination between multiple stakeholders, including government agencies, private contractors, and community organizations. The firm's reputation for technical excellence and project delivery had enabled steady business growth over 15 years, but recent discoveries of ethical violations involving preferential treatment of certain contractors had created regulatory scrutiny and client confidence problems that threatened established relationships and future business development. The conflicts of interest we have identified involve senior engineers who were providing confidential project information to preferred contractors while receiving personal benefits that violated professional ethics standards and potentially compromised project outcomes for our clients, Marcus explained during our preliminary consultation. These violations have triggered regulatory investigations while creating liability exposure that could affect our professional licensing and ability to compete for government contracts. The engineering firm's situation presented additional complexity because regulatory compliance requirements in the engineering profession included specific oversight mechanisms and reporting obligations that differed from legal and financial services contexts. However, the underlying issues involving employee accountability, ethical decision-making, and organizational culture development were fundamentally similar to the challenges that had been successfully addressed at Sterling, Matthews & Associates. Marcus's approach to crisis management had demonstrated proactive leadership and commitment to comprehensive resolution, rather than minimizing immediate consequences while hoping problems would resolve independently. His willingness to invest in systematic organizational development reflected understanding that sustainable success required addressing underlying cultural and accountability issues rather than simply managing immediate regulatory compliance requirements. The systematic evaluation and resolution process you implemented at the law firm appears to address exactly the type of comprehensive organizational development we need to restore regulatory compliance and client confidence, while preventing similar problems from occurring in future project management activities, Marcus explained. We need assistance with developing accountability frameworks and professional culture that ensures all employee behavior aligns with engineering ethics standards and fiduciary responsibilities to clients and regulatory authorities. The third business opportunity involved collaboration with Jennifer Walsh, owner of Walsh Marketing Solutions, a digital marketing agency that provided comprehensive promotional services for small and medium-sized businesses throughout the metropolitan area. Jennifer was facing challenges with employee performance accountability and client service quality that were affecting business growth and competitive positioning within the rapidly evolving digital marketing industry. Walsh Marketing Solutions employed 15 marketing professionals who managed social media campaigns, website development, content creation, and advertising strategies for over 60 active clients. The agency had established strong market position through innovative service delivery and measurable results that exceeded client expectations. But recent difficulties with project management and client communication had created service quality issues that were threatening established relationships and hindering new business development efforts. The specific challenges we are experiencing involve inconsistent service delivery and communication failures that have disappointed several long-term clients while creating reputation concerns that are affecting our ability to attract new business through referral networks, Jennifer explained during our initial discussion. These problems appear to result from inadequate accountability structures and unclear performance standards rather than technical capability deficiencies among our professional staff. Jennifer's assessment of her organizational challenges demonstrated sophisticated understanding that operational problems often reflected systematic issues with management structure and accountability frameworks rather than individual employee competence or motivation. Her request for consulting assistance focused on comprehensive evaluation of business operations and implementation of systematic improvements that would restore service quality while supporting continued growth and competitive advantage. The marketing agency opportunity was particularly interesting because it would enable application of organizational development expertise in creative professional services context, that differed significantly from legal and financial services environments. The systematic approach that had proven effective for addressing ethical accountability and professional standards could be adapted for marketing industry while building experience with performance management and service quality optimization in client service businesses. The convergence of multiple consulting opportunities within weeks of resolving the Sterling Matthews crisis suggested that systematic organizational development capabilities were in significant demand among business owners who recognized the value of comprehensive approach to professional culture development and employee accountability. The reputation for effective crisis management and strategic problem solving that had emerged from successful resolution of the legal firm complications was creating foundation for expanding business operations into management consulting services that could generate substantial revenue while providing intellectual challenge and professional development opportunities. The strategic decision regarding pursuit of management consulting expansion required careful evaluation of resource requirements, market opportunities, and potential integration with existing Sterling Matthews operations. The consulting services would complement legal firm ownership by providing diversified revenue streams, while creating synergies between organizational development expertise and professional services management experience. The initial analysis of consulting market opportunities revealed substantial demand for systematic organizational development services among professional service firms that were facing similar challenges with employee accountability, ethical compliance, and service quality management. Many business owners had recognized that technical competence alone was insufficient for sustained success, and were seeking comprehensive approaches that would address cultural and accountability issues while supporting continued growth and competitive positioning. The competitive landscape analysis indicated that most management consulting services focused either on strategic planning or operational efficiency without providing an integrated approach that addressed both organizational culture development and systematic accountability framework implementation. The combination of legal firm ownership experience, crisis management expertise, and systematic problem-solving capabilities created unique positioning for providing comprehensive organizational development services that addressed multiple dimensions of professional service business management. The resource requirements for management consulting expansion would include development of systematic service delivery methodologies, documentation of proven approaches for different industry contexts, and establishment of project management capabilities that would enable effective coordination of multiple client engagements while maintaining quality standards and client satisfaction. These requirements were manageable within existing capabilities, while providing opportunities for professional development and business growth that aligned with strategic objectives. The revenue potential from management consulting services was substantial, with typical engagements ranging from comprehensive organizational assessments requiring several months of analysis and implementation to ongoing advisory relationships that provided systematic support for business development and operational improvement. The combination of one-time project fees and recurring advisory arrangements could generate diversified income streams while building long-term client relationships that supported continued business expansion. The strategic framework for management consulting development included systematic evaluation of client needs, comprehensive assessment of organizational challenges, development of customized improvement strategies, and implementation support that ensured sustainable results rather than temporary modifications that might revert without continued attention. This approach would differentiate consulting services from competitors, while ensuring that client investments generated measurable improvements in operational effectiveness and business performance. The decision to pursue management consulting expansion represented logical extension of capabilities that had been developed through successful crisis management and organizational development at Sterling Matthews & Associates. The systematic approach that had proven effective for addressing complex professional and ethical challenges could be scaled to serve multiple clients while generating additional revenue streams and professional development opportunities that supported continued business growth and market positioning. The implementation timeline for management consulting development would enable gradual expansion that maintained focus on existing Sterling Matthews operations while building consulting capabilities through initial client engagements that would provide experience and reputation development within the management consulting market. This approach would minimize risk while creating foundation for sustained expansion that could eventually become a significant component of overall business operations and strategic positioning. The implementation phase of the management consulting expansion required development of comprehensive service delivery methodologies that would ensure consistent quality across diverse client engagements, while maintaining the systematic approach that had proven effective in resolving organizational challenges at Sterling, Matthews and Associates. The transition from managing a single professional service firm to coordinating multiple consulting projects demanded sophisticated project management capabilities and systematic documentation of proven strategies that could be adapted for different industry contexts and organizational structures. Patricia Morrison's engagement with Morrison Financial Advisory Services represented the inaugural consulting project that would establish operational procedures and service delivery standards for future client relationships. The comprehensive organizational assessment I conducted during the initial phase revealed systematic accountability deficiencies that had enabled the ethical violations while creating cultural patterns that discouraged professional responsibility and client advocacy among senior staff members. The assessment methodology I developed included comprehensive review of employee performance documentation, analysis of client communication patterns, evaluation of internal control systems, and systematic interviews with all professional staff members to understand organizational culture dynamics and individual accountability perspectives. This multidimensional approach provided complete understanding of both structural problems and cultural issues that required coordinated intervention to achieve sustainable improvement. The financial advisory firm's accountability failures had emerged from inadequate supervision of investment recommendation processes, combined with compensation structures that created incentives for employees to prioritize personal financial benefits over client interest optimization. Senior financial planners had been making investment recommendations that generated higher commission income for themselves while providing suboptimal returns for clients, creating systematic patterns of fiduciary responsibility violations that had continued undetected for several months. The compensation structure we have been using inadvertently created conflicts of interest that encouraged employees to prioritize personal financial benefits rather than client outcome optimization, Patricia acknowledged during our comprehensive assessment review meeting. The systematic nature of these problems suggests that individual ethical failures were symptoms of broader organizational design issues rather than isolated incidents of professional misconduct. Patricia's recognition that individual ethical violations reflected systematic organizational problems rather than isolated character deficiencies demonstrated sophisticated understanding of management principles and accountability framework development that would support effective implementation of corrective measures. Her willingness to acknowledge structural problems rather than simply addressing individual employee behavior indicated commitment to comprehensive solution development that would prevent similar problems from recurring. The intervention strategy I developed for Morrison Financial Advisory Services included complete restructuring of compensation systems to eliminate conflicts of interest, implementation of systematic client outcome tracking to ensure investment recommendations served client interests, establishment of peer review processes for all major financial planning decisions, and development of professional development programs that reinforced fiduciary responsibility principles and ethical decision-making frameworks. The compensation restructuring eliminated commission-based incentives that had encouraged suboptimal client recommendations, while implementing performance evaluation systems that measured client satisfaction, portfolio performance, and professional development rather than revenue generation alone. This modification aligned employee incentives with client interest optimization while maintaining motivation for business development and professional excellence. The client outcome tracking system provided objective measurement of investment recommendation effectiveness, while creating accountability mechanisms that ensured systematic attention to client results, rather than simply transaction completion. Regular performance review processes enabled early identification of problems while providing recognition for employees who consistently delivered exceptional client outcomes and professional service excellence. The implementation process required 6 months of intensive collaboration with Morrison Financial Advisory Services leadership and professional staff to establish new operational procedures, while monitoring performance improvements and client satisfaction enhancement. The systematic approach generated measurable results that exceeded initial project objectives, while creating foundation for sustained organizational excellence that would support continued business growth and competitive advantage. Client satisfaction scores improved by 38% during the implementation period, while portfolio performance metrics demonstrated consistent improvement across all client categories. Employee professional development assessments indicated enhanced understanding of fiduciary responsibilities and ethical decision-making principles. while internal accountability measures showed sustained compliance with revised operational procedures and performance standards. The success achieved at Morrison Financial Advisory Services provided comprehensive documentation of effective organizational development methodologies while generating client testimonials and case study materials that supported marketing efforts for additional consulting engagements. The systematic approach had proven effective across multiple dimensions of professional service business management, while demonstrating scalability for application to other organizational contexts and industry challenges. Marcus Rodriguez's engagement with Rodriguez Engineering Consultants presented different challenges that required adaptation of organizational development strategies for regulatory compliance environment and technical professional service delivery context. The engineering firm's ethical violations had created regulatory scrutiny that required immediate corrective action while threatening professional licensing status and competitive positioning within the municipal contracting market. The assessment phase revealed that conflicts of interest involving preferential contractor treatment had emerged from inadequate project management oversight, combined with informal relationship patterns that had developed between senior engineers and preferred vendors over extended collaboration periods. These relationships had gradually evolved into systematic advantages for certain contractors, while compromising competitive bidding processes and potentially affecting project quality and cost optimization for clients. The vendor relationship problems we discovered appear to have developed gradually through repeated collaboration on successful projects, creating informal partnerships that eventually compromised our professional judgment and regulatory compliance, Marcus explained during our initial assessment review. The systematic nature of these problems suggests that individual ethical failures were enabled by inadequate oversight structures rather than deliberate misconduct by otherwise professional employees. The intervention strategy I developed for Rodriguez Engineering Consultants included comprehensive revision of vendor relationship management policies, implementation of systematic project oversight mechanisms, establishment of rotating project assignment procedures to prevent excessive informal relationships, and development of regulatory compliance training programs that reinforced the vendor relationship policy revisions established clear boundaries for professional interactions while implementing documentation requirements that ensured transparency and accountability in all contractor communications and decision-making processes. These procedures eliminated opportunities for preferential treatment while maintaining collaborative relationships necessary for effective project delivery and client satisfaction. The project oversight mechanisms included systematic review of all major decisions by multiple senior engineers, documentation requirements for vendor selection rationale, and client communication protocols that ensured transparency about project management processes and decision-making criteria. These accountability measures addressed regulatory compliance concerns while providing clients with confidence in professional service delivery and ethical business practices. The implementation process at Rodriguez Engineering Consultants required coordination with regulatory authorities to ensure that corrective measures addressed specific compliance concerns while demonstrating comprehensive commitment to professional ethics standards and systematic prevention of similar problems in future project management activities. The regulatory collaboration enhanced credibility while providing external validation of improvement initiatives and organizational culture development. The results achieved through systematic organizational development exceeded regulatory requirements, while positioning Rodriguez Engineering Consultants for enhanced competitive advantage through demonstrated commitment to professional excellence and ethical business practices. Client satisfaction improvements and regulatory compliance recognition generated new business opportunities while strengthening established relationships and market reputation. Jennifer Walsh's engagement with Walsh Marketing Solutions required adaptation of organizational development strategies for creative professional services context, where performance measurement and accountability frameworks differed significantly from legal, financial, and engineering service environments. The marketing agency's challenges involved service quality consistency and client communication effectiveness rather than ethical violations or regulatory compliance issues. The assessment phase revealed that service delivery inconsistencies had emerged from inadequate project management coordination combined with unclear performance standards that created confusion about client expectations and professional responsibility among creative staff members. The agency's growth had outpaced development of systematic operational procedures, creating gaps in accountability and quality control that affected client satisfaction and business development potential. The service quality problems we have been experiencing appear to result from rapid business growth that exceeded our operational capacity rather than individual competence deficiencies among our professional staff. Jennifer acknowledged during our assessment review meeting. The creative nature of our work requires systematic approaches that maintain quality standards while preserving innovation and artistic flexibility that our clients value. The intervention strategy I developed for Walsh Marketing Solutions included comprehensive project management system development, implementation of systematic client communication protocols, establishment of creative quality review processes, and development of performance measurement frameworks that balanced creativity with accountability and client satisfaction optimization. The project management system provided systematic coordination of creative activities while ensuring consistent client communication and expectation management throughout campaign development and implementation processes. These procedures eliminated service delivery gaps while maintaining creative flexibility and innovation capabilities that differentiated the agency from competitors. The client communication protocols established regular touchpoints and feedback mechanisms that ensured client involvement and satisfaction, while providing early identification of potential problems or scope modifications that might affect project timelines or outcomes. These systematic approaches enhanced client relationships while reducing misunderstandings and service quality issues. The implementation process at Walsh Marketing Solutions required intensive collaboration with creative staff to develop accountability frameworks that supported professional excellence while maintaining artistic freedom and innovation capabilities. The balance between systematic procedures and creative flexibility required careful calibration to ensure that quality improvements did not compromise the creative energy and innovation that generated client satisfaction and competitive advantage. The results achieved through organizational development at Walsh Marketing Solutions demonstrated significant improvements in client satisfaction, service delivery consistency, and operational efficiency, while maintaining creative excellence and innovation capabilities. The systematic approach had proven effective for creative professional services context, while generating documentation and methodologies that could be applied to other marketing and creative service organizations. The success achieved across 3 diverse consulting engagements provided comprehensive validation of systematic organizational development methodologies, while establishing reputation for effective crisis resolution and business improvement within the professional services market. The consistent results across different industry contexts demonstrated scalability and adaptability of proven approaches, while building foundation for continued consulting expansion and business development. The consulting service delivery experience generated comprehensive understanding of organizational development principles while providing systematic documentation of effective methodologies that could support continued expansion into additional market segments and industry contexts. The combination of proven results, satisfied clients, and systematic service delivery capabilities created foundation for sustained business growth and professional development that aligned with strategic objectives and personal interests. The market response to successful consulting implementations indicated substantial demand for comprehensive organizational development services that addressed both immediate crisis resolution and longer-term business improvement objectives. The systematic approach that integrated cultural development, accountability framework implementation, and performance optimization had proven effective across multiple industry contexts, while generating competitive advantage and client satisfaction that supported continued business expansion. The strategic positioning achieved through successful consulting implementations provided foundation for continued expansion that could eventually become primary focus of business operations, while maintaining Sterling Matthews & Associates as foundational client and operational base. The combination of legal firm ownership and management consulting services created synergistic business model that leveraged systematic organizational development expertise across multiple market segments and professional service contexts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.